My mother asked me to come over alone. Then she said, "Promise me you won't overreact." My sister was crying. "She's pregnant," Mom whispered. I almost hugged her until she added, "Your husband is the father." They expected silence. Instead, I made one decision that shattered their plan. Don't bring Donovan. Donovan was my husband. We'd been married for 9 years. I asked if Dad was okay. Mom said he was fine. Then I asked if something had happened to my younger sister, Tessa. There was a pause. Only a second or two. Still long enough to make me nervous. "She's okay," Mom said. "Just come over." For the rest of the afternoon, I kept imagining normal family problems. Maybe Tessa had lost her job. Maybe she needed money. Maybe she'd gotten back together with the guy she broke up with earlier that year. That breakup had hit her hard. There were nights she called me crying because she didn't want to be alone. Sometimes she came to our house and stayed until late. Donovan had always been kind to her. Protective, even. I used to think that was one of the good things about him. When I arrived at my parents' house, Tessa was sitting at the kitchen table. Her eyes were swollen from crying. My mother, Priscilla, stood by the counter gripping a coffee mug with both hands. Dad wasn't there. Nobody said hello. I put my purse down. "What happened?" Tessa stared at the table. Mom took a breath. "Before I tell you, promise me you won't overreact." I immediately hated the wording. How am I supposed to promise that when I don't know what you're about to tell me? "Marin, I just need you to stay calm." "Mom." "Tell me." She looked at Tessa. Tessa started crying harder. Then Mom said, "She's pregnant." For a second, I actually felt relieved. Tessa was 29. Single, yes, but an adult. A pregnancy could be complicated without being a catastrophe. I walked over and hugged her. "We'll figure it out." The second I touched her, she broke down. Not normal crying. Her whole body shook. I pulled back. "Tessa." She wouldn't look at me. Mom sat down. Then she said, "The father is Donovan." Everything inside me went still. "What?" Mom swallowed. "Donovan is the father." I stared at Tessa. She covered her face. My brain did something ridiculous. I wondered if she knew another Donovan. I actually asked my Donovan. Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. I sat down because my legs suddenly didn't feel steady. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even cry. I just stared at my sister while she kept saying, "I'm sorry." Finally, I asked, "How long?" Mom tried to interrupt. "Marin." "I'm asking her." Tessa wiped her face. "About 7 months." 7 months. That number changed everything. Not one terrible night. Not some impulsive mistake they immediately regretted. 7 months meant messages. Plans. Lies. Opportunities to stop. I asked how far along she was. Almost 12 weeks. So the affair had been going on for months before the pregnancy. I looked at her. "How did this start?" Mom said, "I don't think going through every detail is going to help." I turned to her. "I wasn't asking you." Tessa started talking quickly. After her breakup, Donovan had started checking on her. At first, I knew about it. He'd ask me how she was doing. He'd joke that she needed to stop dating terrible men. Sometimes he included her in group messages. Then, apparently, the messages became private. He asked if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if she was okay. Eventually, the conversations became personal. He talked about our marriage. That part made my stomach turn. "What did he tell you about me?" Tessa hesitated. "That you were busy." "What else?" "He said you were tired all the time. That you didn't really talk anymore." I stared at her. "And you thought the answer was this?" She shook her head. "I didn't plan it. Nobody ever plans betrayal in the version they tell afterward. It just somehow happens to them." Tessa said the first time was one weekend when I went to visit my friend Kaya. She'd been upset. She came to our house. Donovan invited her in. They drank and talked. Then they crossed a line. She didn't give me details. I didn't want them. She said the next morning they both felt terrible. They agreed it could never happen again. I almost laughed. "You agreed that 7 months ago." She looked down. "I know. No. You're telling me about the first night like that's the whole story. It isn't." "I know. One time could maybe be called a horrible mistake. 7 months is a choice you kept making." Mom spoke up. "People get trapped in situations." I looked at her. A 7-month affair isn't a trap. Tessa admitted they would stop for a week or two. Sometimes longer. Then one of them would reach out. Then they would meet again. Usually when I wasn't around. That was when ordinary memories started rearranging themselves. Donovan suddenly needing to run errands. Tessa canceling dinners. Her refusing wine at family gatherings. Donovan becoming strangely formal around her. I had noticed pieces. I just never connected them because the possibility was too absurd. Tessa had a key to my house. She ate at my table. She borrowed my clothes. When her relationship ended, I stayed on the phone with her until 2 in the morning more than once. Donovan had sat beside me during some of those calls. Apparently, after I hung up, he sometimes messaged her himself. I asked the question I was almost afraid to ask. Do you love him? Tessa went quiet. I don't know. That hurt more than a simple no. It meant she had wondered. I asked, does he love you? She started crying again. I didn't need an answer. Then my mother made everything worse. She said, you and Donovan haven't exactly been happy. I turned toward her. What did you just say? I'm not blaming you. Then stop. She didn't. She said she had noticed I'd been working a lot. That Donovan sometimes seemed lonely. That he had complained I was emotionally distant. I stared at her while she slowly rewrote my marriage in front of me. Donovan and I had problems. Of course we did. We'd been married 9 years. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes I came home exhausted. Sometimes he wanted more attention than I had energy to give. But we weren't separated. We weren't discussing divorce. We still made plans. A few months earlier, we talked about what we wanted to do for our 10th anniversary. He still kissed me goodbye. He still told me he loved me. I said, are you seriously explaining why my husband had an affair with my sister? Mom shook her head. No. I'm saying these things don't happen for no reason. That sounds exactly like blaming me. Tessa was vulnerable. So? Donovan felt neglected. So? Marin, marriages fall apart when people stop meeting each other's needs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You know what adults do when they're unhappy? They talk. They ask for counseling. They separate. They leave. They don't start an affair with their wife's sister. Mom's face tightened. Then she told me not to make any permanent decisions while I was emotional. Her exact words were, you could destroy 3 lives because you're angry. I stared at her. Who's 3? She paused. I already knew. Donovan's. Tessa's. And the baby's. I waited. She didn't say mine. Interesting. What? You forgot someone. Her face changed. Marin, obviously I care about you. Not enough to include me in the number. Tessa whispered, please don't blame Mom. I don't blame Mom for what you did. I blame Mom for what she's doing right now. Then something occurred to me. How long have you known? Mom looked at Tessa. That was enough. How long? Not long. How long is not long? She sighed. Almost 3 weeks. I stood up. For almost 3 weeks, my mother had known. She'd spoken to me normally. Sent me messages. Called me about random things. I had eaten dinner with my parents during those 3 weeks. She sat across from me knowing my husband had gotten my sister pregnant. You knew for 3 weeks? Tessa needed time. For what? To decide what she was going to do. Then I found out what those 3 weeks had really been about. Mom had been trying to contain the situation. At one point, she suggested Tessa tell people the father was someone else until they could figure out what to do. Tessa refused. That was apparently where her conscience finally showed up. I asked Mom what she thought would happen when the baby arrived. Was everybody supposed to pretend Donovan was just an unusually involved uncle? She said she hadn't meant forever. Just long enough to prevent chaos. I said, you mean long enough to prevent embarrassment? She didn't answer. I grabbed my purse. Tessa stood. Marin, please. I looked at her. For once, she had nothing to say. Then I asked, does Donovan know you're telling me today? Another silence. Mom answered. Yes. Of course he did. Everyone had prepared for this conversation except me. They had discussed what to say. Probably discussed how I might react. I had become the unpredictable problem in a situation I didn't create. I left. The drive home was a blur. The stupidest memories kept appearing in my head. Donovan making coffee that morning. Donovan reminding me we needed detergent. Donovan kissing my forehead before I left. Normal marriage. Normal morning. And somewhere inside that normal life was a pregnancy. When I reached the house, his car was already there. He was sitting in the living room. He stood when I walked in. Marin. Don't. He looked exhausted. Normally, seeing him upset would have made me worry. That instinct didn't disappear just because I knew what he'd done. That almost made it worse. I sat across from him. How long? 7 months. And the baby is yours? Yes. No hesitation. I asked him to tell me how it happened. His version sounded almost identical to Tessa's. Bad breakup. Private messages. One night. Regret. Promises to stop. Then it kept happening. He said he tried ending it several times. How many? I don't know. Guess. 3 or 4. And every time you ended it, somehow you started again? He rubbed his face. She would message me. There it was. Not a full accusation. Just enough blame shifted toward Tessa to make himself slightly less responsible. Did she force you to answer? No. Did she force you to meet her? No. Did she force you to lie to me? No. Then stop saying she messaged you like your phone made the decisions. He looked down. He said he knew there was no excuse. Then he gave me explanations anyway. He had felt lonely. I had been tired. We had stopped talking as much. He liked feeling needed. I asked why he hadn't told me our marriage was apparently so broken. He said he had tried. Maybe there was some truth in that. He had told me he missed spending time together. He had complained about my schedule. I hadn't always taken those conversations seriously enough. I could admit that. But there was still one question he couldn't escape. Why didn't you tell me after the first time? He whispered, I thought you'd leave. I stared at him. But you weren't scared enough to stop. He started crying. Then he said the sentence that finally gave me clarity. I still love you. I almost wished he had said he didn't. If he'd fallen out of love with me, maybe the whole thing would have made some ugly kind of sense. Instead, he was telling me he loved me while admitting he had betrayed me repeatedly. I asked, do you love Tessa? No. The answer came fast. Then why risk our marriage for someone you don't even love? He couldn't answer. I stood and went to the bedroom. He followed me. I pulled a suitcase from the closet and put it on the bed. He looked terrified. What are you doing? Packing. I pushed the suitcase toward him. Yours. He asked where he was supposed to go. I almost laughed. You figured out where to go every time you wanted to see my sister. Figure this out too. He sat on the edge of the bed. Please don't make a permanent decision tonight. I'm not. For 1 second, he looked hopeful. Then I said, you've been making this decision for 7 months. He left. He went to a hotel. My mother called almost immediately. I ignored her. She called again. Then she sent me a message. Please don't do anything permanent tonight. As if I were the reckless person in the story. I turned off my phone. That first night alone was strange. Nothing in the house looked different. Our wedding picture was still on a shelf. Donovan's jacket hung over a chair. His mug was in the dishwasher. His shoes were by the door. I'd always imagined that when your life fell apart, the room would somehow look different too. It didn't. I finally cried when I walked into the bathroom and saw our toothbrushes beside each other. That was what broke me. One ordinary reminder that, until that afternoon, I still thought I had a husband. The next morning, Donovan sent me a long message. He offered everything. Counseling. Full access to his phone. Location sharing. Individual therapy. Marriage therapy. Anything I wanted. He said the affair was over. I stared at that sentence. The affair might have been over. The consequences weren't. Tessa was pregnant. There was going to be a child. If I stayed married to Donovan, my sister would remain connected to my husband forever. Medical appointments. Child support. Birthdays. Emergencies. School events. There was no realistic version where they stopped speaking and I got my old marriage back. That marriage was gone. My mother still seemed to think the situation could be managed. When I finally answered her call, she immediately started talking about counseling. Then she suggested we keep everything inside the immediate family until after the baby was born. I asked why. Tessa is already under a lot of stress. So am I. I know, but stress during pregnancy. Mom. She stopped. Then she made a suggestion I still can't believe. She thought Donovan and I should stay together for now. At least until Tessa gave birth. Not because she thought it would save our marriage. Because she worried a divorce would make Tessa feel responsible. I said, she is responsible. Mom went silent. She and Donovan are responsible. I'm not going to pretend otherwise because the truth makes her uncomfortable. That's cruel. No. Cruel was letting me share a bed with someone who was hiding this from me. Mom told me to think about the baby. That became her answer to everything. If I divorced Donovan, think about the baby. If I cut off Tessa, think about the baby. If I told anyone what happened, think about the baby. The baby had done nothing wrong. I knew that. But an innocent child had become a shield everyone used whenever they wanted me to accept something I wasn't ready to accept. I asked Mom what she actually expected me to do. Her plan was simple. Donovan and I would attend counseling. Tessa would stay with my parents. Donovan would support the child privately. Extended family wouldn't be told anything yet. And after the baby is born, we'll deal with that then. That was her entire strategy. Delay reality until everyone became tired enough to accept it. I contacted a divorce attorney. I didn't file that same day. I gathered financial records first. I needed to understand what separation would mean practically. Donovan moved from the hotel into a furnished apartment. A few days later, he asked to meet. I chose a coffee shop. I didn't want him in the house. When I saw him sitting there, part of me nearly walked out. Another part wanted to sit beside him like I always had. That was the confusing part. I still loved him. 9 years didn't disappear because I learned something horrible. Love and trust turned out to be two different things. He asked whether there was any chance we could save the marriage. At that point, I said, I don't know. He looked relieved. Then he started talking about rebuilding. I asked what that meant. Therapy. Honesty. Boundaries. Boundaries with who? He looked down. Tessa. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You had the strongest boundary possible. She was my sister. I know. No. You know the words. I don't think you understand them anymore. He said they would communicate only about the baby. So I asked practical questions. What happens when the baby is sick? What happens if Tessa calls at 2 in the morning? What happens when their child wants both parents at the same birthday party? What happens when school starts? What happens if one of them starts dating someone else? He said none of that would matter because he didn't love Tessa. I looked at him. You told me you loved me while you were seeing her. He stopped talking. That was the problem. Every promise he made depended on trust. He had already destroyed it. A few days later, I filed for divorce. That was the decision my mother hadn't expected. Until then, she acted like she was helping me avoid a mistake. Once I actually filed, relatives began calling. My Aunt Rochelle was the first. She told me Mom had said Donovan and I were having serious marital problems and that I had refused counseling. I asked, is that all she told you? Rochelle hesitated. Yes. I sat there for a moment. Mom had created a version where I looked impulsive, difficult, maybe even selfish. And she expected me to protect that version because telling the truth would embarrass everyone. Rochelle asked, what actually happened? I knew what Mom wanted me to say. I chose something else. Donovan got Tessa pregnant. Silence. What? He had an affair with my sister. She's pregnant. He's the father. I didn't post anything online. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't send messages to relatives. But when people called me and asked why I was divorcing my husband, I told them the truth. It spread quickly. Mom was furious. She showed up at my house without warning. The second I opened the door, she said, how could you do that to your sister? I stared at her. Do what? You told Rochelle. She asked why I was getting divorced. You humiliated Tessa. Something in me finally snapped. Tessa had an affair with my husband for 7 months. Keep your voice down. No. The neighbors don't need to hear this. I don't care. She is pregnant and terrified. And I was married and completely unaware. She made a terrible mistake. 7 months, Mom. I know. Then stop calling it one mistake. Mom said I was being cruel because I was hurt. I asked her one question. When you knew for 3 weeks, did you spend even 1 day protecting me? She looked confused. What do you mean? Did you tell Tessa she had to tell me immediately? Did you call Donovan and demand that he confess? Did you once think about me waking up beside him while all of you knew? She didn't answer. Instead, she repeated that she had been trying to protect the family. I said, no. You were protecting the appearance of one. She left crying. For a while, Dad was the only person who called. Glenn had stayed mostly quiet through everything. He apologized for what Donovan and Tessa had done. Then he apologized for Mom. He told me he disagreed with how she handled it. I asked the obvious question. Why didn't you say anything? He sighed. You know how your mother gets. That answer made me angry. That's not an excuse, Dad. I know. You could have told her I deserved the truth. I know. You could have said something when she blamed me. I know. At least he didn't argue. He just apologized. Tessa stopped contacting me. Then, about 2 weeks later, she sent me a long message. I almost deleted it. I didn't. For the first time, she didn't call the affair a mistake. She said the first night had been impulsive. Everything after that was a choice. She admitted Donovan never promised to leave me. She never asked him to. They didn't even have some secret plan to build a life together. They had existed inside a selfish little bubble where neither of them seriously talked about what would happen if I found out. That almost made it worse. There wasn't some huge love story behind the destruction. They had risked my marriage without even knowing what they wanted. Tessa said she wasn't going to be with Donovan. Whatever fantasy existed between them disappeared the moment she saw the positive pregnancy test. Suddenly, everything became real. She might lose her sister. He might lose his marriage. They were going to have a child together. They couldn't pretend it existed only when I wasn't around anymore. At the end of the message, Tessa said she understood if I never forgave her. She didn't ask me to reply. So I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish her. I simply had nothing left to say. Eventually, Dad asked me to come to my parents' house for one conversation. Everyone would be there. He said the separate calls and messages were making things worse. I almost refused. Then I decided I wanted to say what I needed to say once, in front of all of them. Donovan was already there when I arrived. Tessa sat on the opposite side of the room. They barely looked at each other. Mom began speaking like she was running a meeting. She talked about compassion, family, moving forward, the baby needing stability. Then she said something that made the entire room go silent. Marin, whether this family survives is partly up to you now. I stared at her. Me? You're the one cutting people off. Donovan immediately said, Priscilla, don't. She ignored him. She said forgiveness was a choice. She said I didn't have to stay married to Donovan, but refusing to speak to Tessa or attend future family gatherings would punish everyone forever. I asked, why is fixing what they broke suddenly my job? It isn't about fixing it. It's about not making things worse. There's going to be a baby, she added. A child who won't understand why their aunt refuses to be around. There it was again. I said, I have never blamed that child. But your choices will affect them. So did theirs. That isn't productive. For some reason, that sentence made me calm. I looked around the room. At Donovan. At Tessa. At Dad. Then at my mother. I need every person in this room to understand something. Nobody spoke. I wasn't there when Donovan started privately messaging Tessa. I wasn't there the first time they crossed the line. Or the next time. I wasn't there during the months they kept choosing this behind my back. I wasn't there when Tessa found out she was pregnant. And I wasn't included during the 3 weeks all of you knew before I did. Mom started to speak. I kept going. So stop handing me responsibility for what happens next. Tessa started crying. I said, maybe my marriage had problems. Fine. Maybe Donovan was lonely. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I didn't always listen. I can own every mistake I made as a wife. I looked at Donovan. But there were plenty of choices between feeling neglected and betraying me with my sister. He lowered his eyes. Then I looked at Tessa. And plenty more between the first night and 7 months later. Tessa nodded. Finally, I looked at Mom. They made their choices without me. You made yours after you found out. Now I get to make mine. Mom said, and what about your sister? Before I could answer, Tessa spoke. Stop. Everyone looked at her. She wiped her face. Mom, stop blaming her. I'm not blaming anyone. Yes, you are. Mom looked stunned. Tessa continued. I did this. Donovan did this. Marin didn't. Mom said Tessa was emotional. Tessa shook her head. You keep trying to make her responsible for making everybody comfortable again. She doesn't have to. I didn't forgive my sister in that moment. It wasn't that simple. But something shifted. For the first time since the truth came out, Tessa wasn't asking me to understand her. She was accepting that I didn't have to. Then Donovan spoke. She's right. Mom looked at him. Donovan said he still wanted another chance with me, but he understood wanting one didn't mean he deserved it. Then he admitted something I hadn't expected. He said he had let Mom talk about our marital problems because it made his betrayal sound less terrible. It was easier to let part of the blame land on me than carry all of it himself. Then he looked at me. I'm sorry. I had heard him apologize many times. But this was the first apology that didn't come with a request. No promise. No bargaining. No, please come home. Just sorry. And strangely, that was enough. Not enough to stay married. Enough to stop needing anything else from him. I left before dinner. Dad walked me to my car. Before I got inside, he hugged me. Then he said, "You don't have to come back until you want to." That meant more than he probably realized. The divorce is still moving forward. Donovan has his apartment. He's involved with the pregnancy and plans to co-parent. As far as I know, he and Tessa are not together. Whatever existed between them seems to have collapsed under the weight of reality. Donovan and I communicate only about practical things now. The house, money, legal paperwork. Sometimes he says he wishes he could undo everything. I don't answer those messages anymore. Tessa still lives with my parents. She doesn't ask me to forgive her. Dad occasionally asks whether I want pregnancy updates. Sometimes I say yes. Usually I say no. I haven't decided whether I'll meet the baby. Everyone seems to want an answer to that question now. I don't have one. The child is innocent. I know that. Maybe one day I'll be able to see them as nothing more than my niece or nephew. Maybe I'll love them. Maybe being around them will hurt too much. I'm not going to make that decision just to make everyone else comfortable. Mom and I barely speak. She still believes telling relatives the truth made everything worse. I still believe I had no responsibility to lie about why my marriage ended. The strangest part is that I'm not angry all the time anymore. At first, anger kept me moving. I organized paperwork, changed the bedroom, packed Donovan's remaining things, handled every practical problem I could find. Then one night, when there was nothing left to organize, I started asking myself what I had done wrong. Maybe I really had worked too much. Maybe I had taken Donovan for granted. Maybe I should have listened more carefully when he said he felt lonely. I went through years of memories looking for the point where their choices became my fault. I couldn't find one. I wasn't a perfect wife. I can admit that. But an imperfect marriage doesn't make an affair inevitable. Donovan had other choices. So did Tessa. And when my mother found out, so did she. I don't want revenge anymore. I don't want Donovan ruined. He's going to be somebody's father, and I hope he becomes a good one. I don't want Tessa miserable forever. She's going to live with what she did whether I remind her or not. I don't even need my mother to admit she was wrong. What I want is distance. I don't want Thanksgiving to become some test where I have to sit across from my ex-husband and my sister so everyone can congratulate themselves for keeping the family together. I don't want forgiveness turned into a performance. Maybe years from now, things will change. Maybe Tessa and I will speak again. Maybe Mom and I will rebuild something. Maybe I'll meet the baby. I'm leaving room for those possibilities. But I'm not promising them. Right now, Donovan is preparing to become a father. Tessa is preparing to become a mother. My parents are learning that a family can't be forced back into its old shape just because the truth is uncomfortable. And I'm moving forward with the divorce. That was the decision they thought I'd eventually reconsider. I didn't. They expected me to stay quiet long enough for everyone else to decide what my healing should look like. Instead, I stopped protecting the story they wanted people to believe. My mother says I'm the one tearing the family apart. Maybe that's how it looks from where she's standing. But I think the family broke long before anyone bothered to tell me. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't. So am I wrong for refusing to forgive my sister right now and for telling our relatives why my marriage actually ended, even though my mother says I'm making an innocent child pay for choices the adults made?